We'll start with a couple statements of praise. If you agree, you can say amen or nod your head, whatever you feel comfortable with. Praise God that we have the ability to communicate to one another and to Him. Amen. Praise God that we have a tongue that we can use to sing praises to Him. Amen. And praise God that He is willing to help us learn how to control our tongues. Because that is a hard task. We've been studying from the book of James, and you might think, well, man, this idea, this concept of learning how to control your tongue seems to be something that us preachers talk about quite regularly, and it is because it is in God's book quite regularly. There's a big section of it here in James chapter 3, but peppered throughout the Bible are little statements about how we need to use our tongue and how we need to control our tongue, how we can use it for good reasons or how we can use it for bad reasons. And so it's important that we often come back to this topic and look at how we learn, with God's help, to control our tongue. I love the book of James. Not only is it a practical book, it is the wisdom literature of the New Testament, but I love the way James uses so many images that help us understand what he's talking about. Remember, he compares the man who asks for God for something but doesn't have the proper faith. That's like a man, that's like a wave tossed to and back with the wind. And you can look at that. We've all seen waves, right? They're there for a minute and then they vanish away. So we can know a man that has no faith and goes and talks to God is like that. That's not very good. There's not going to receive anything from God. He uses the image of the sun comes up and it withers the grass. And he talks about that's what really our life is like. It's short, but not only that, all the things that we accomplish on this life go away very quickly. They don't last very long. And that's a great image to use to keep our focus on what is important and what is not important. And then he talks about the mirror. We can relate to a mirror. We know that when we go in the morning, we look at ourselves in the mirror, that we're supposed to make the proper adjustments. We're not supposed to just walk away from the mirror thinking, I got big old something on my face, I'm not going to get it off. We make the proper adjustments. So when we look into the perfect law of liberty, we're supposed to make the proper adjustments. We're supposed to make the changes in our life. So these images are so powerful to us. He talked about how somebody comes into the assembly and they're dressed in very wealthy garments and they have gold on, and we treat them one way, but somebody comes in with dirty clothes on that might smell a little bit, they're poor, we say, sit by my footstool. We can see that and we can know instinctively that's not right. We shouldn't do something like that. And so the images that he has in this book are so powerful. He used the one that we talked about last time. Somebody is needing food or clothing or shelter, and we say, good luck with that. I hope you find it. And we walk away and we don't help them. And he says, faith without works is dead, like the body without the spirit is dead. So those are very important images. In today's text, he's going to use a lot more images, things that maybe we can relate to and notice, and then take the spiritual principle and learn from it. So that every time, maybe that we ride a horse, or maybe every time that we do certain things, we can relate those back to what he is talking about. I'm glad that we have the chance to open up God's book today and look at what God says about how we are to use our tongue on a regular basis. I am grateful that you are here. As a group of God's people, we come together because we love to worship God. We believe in Him. We think He is worthy of worship. We enjoy studying His Word. That's important to us. God gave us this book. It's important. We're going to study it, right? And we love one another. And we want our life and our works to show that we love one another. And then we love people who aren't part of God's family, and we want them to become part of God's family. And that's what we do together as a group here at PSD. Let's start in the text. James chapter 3, starting in verse 1. James chapter 3, starting in verse 1. My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, also able to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. So before we get into the analogy of the horse and the ship, we do need to take just a few minutes to talk about verse 1. Verse 1, he warns everybody, don't let many of you become teachers because teachers will receive stricter judgment. Now, I understand that all of us are teachers to some degree. We teach our kids, we teach our spouse, we teach those that we come in contact with. But he's talking more on a formal basis here. So let me just outline a couple things that those who do desire to be teachers, become teachers, need to be careful of. One is just some advice. Teaching the basics about Jesus Christ and Him crucified is always a good thing. You know, sometimes that's what people need to hear. All the time, that's what people need to hear. We were teasing in our Bible class about sometimes, you know, little kids' classes, kids don't know the answer, and you ask them who, and their answer, no matter what the question is, God, right? God or Jesus, because God or Jesus is almost always the right answer. And that is true when it comes to teaching. If you don't know what to teach, and if you're worried about teaching the wrong thing to the wrong person, just go back and teach the basics about Jesus. Talk about Him and what He did for us. Teachers must be wise enough to know who to teach, what to teach to whom and when. And that's tough. He's talking over there in that 1 Corinthians 6 passage that you have people who are supposed to be full grown. You look at them and you think they've been going to church for a long time. They've been studying the Word for a long time. They ought to know certain things, but they don't. And you have to know what to teach to whom and when you are to teach it, because not everybody can accept the solid meat of the Word. Teachers should never teach their opinions as God's truth. I put down there in my handwriting here, because I didn't have it on your outline, I added as God's truth. Because sometimes as we teach, we may have to say, this is what I think the passage means, but we have to be careful presenting our opinions as God's truth. We're going to be judged on that. Just like shepherds always talk about, we're going to be judged about how we shepherd God's people. Teachers are going to be judged and what they teach, and they make sure they separate. This is what I think, and this is what I know. There's a big difference there. And then teachers should not teach man's traditions as God's truth. That was the problem in Jesus' time. In Matthew chapter 15, Jesus warns about that. You teach as the traditions of man, you teach those as they came from God. You blurred the lines between what man says and what God says, and we never want to do that. We want to make sure we know exactly what God says, and we know what man says. Now, man might say some things that align with what God says, but we need to know the difference there. And so that's why one of the things that why it's so important that we don't take this action of teaching others lightly, because it is very important. So let's get to the analogy here of horses and ships. Brian's article last week talked about birds and how birds don't worry. And no matter what, they don't worry who won the election. They don't worry about all this stuff. They don't worry about this. And we need to take some lessons from them. They are your new favorite preacher. So I want Shelly to go ahead and hit the button to show all these pictures. Now these pictures I got way more pictures than I thought I was going to get, okay? And I got all these pictures. I'm like, I got to try to use them. So find yourself on the picture if they're up there. If you sent the picture, I tried to get it up there. If I failed to get your picture up there, please forgive me and use your tongue to say nice things instead of bad things. How dare that preacher forget to put my picture up there? He did that intentionally. And I told Shelly, 15 seconds, 20 seconds per slide, that's all we have time for. But sort of notice what you see on the horses that are actually being ridden. You're seeing this bit come up over and over and over again. You may not be able to see it in the picture, but I magnified many of these pictures to see if I could see the bit in the horse's mouth. Chances are, any of us, if we are going to get on a horse, we are going to make sure it has a bit in its mouth, and we have the reins. Very few of us are going to jump on a horse that has no bit, no bridle, no reins. I mean, you might do that. There's a couple there that don't have that. So this picture here, stop here for a second, Shelley. This one here is the pictures that I got out that I don't see a bit in the horse's mouth. And you see there's a horse is being ridden, but it's being guided. I didn't see a bit in that horse's mouth. And the point is, you're not trying to control those horses for the most part. But if you want to control a horse, you put a bit in its mouth. That's what it's for. Go ahead and There's the best picture of the bit in the mouth. That's Camille, you're riding the horse. They had the best, clearest picture of the bit in the horse's mouth. And I did this as research. I don't know a lot about horses. I have ridden horses a few times. My dad bought horses after I went to college, and every time I went back, he wanted to take me on these long 3-hour horse rides through the dunes in northern Indiana. And I was like, oh, Dad, this is worse than a spanking. Because, my bottom hurt every time because I wasn't used to riding, and I was up and down. I'm like, this is terrible. But a lot of people get accustomed to it. They love it. They love horses. And so I did a little research on the bit. You think about this for a second. Everybody's mouth is different, right? My mouth is different than your mouth. All horses' mouths are different. And so you have to get a bit that sort of fits the horse. And it's got to serve the purpose that you want to use that horse for. And the bits aren't supposed to hurt the horses unless the horse isn't giving you control. And then there's going to be some pressure, some discomfort because they're not doing what you want the horse to do. And I think that's an important aspect of it. All right, did we have the picture of the ships up there? Have we passed that? All right, so the ships aren't going to get equal time. So here you have 3 big ships, and you'll notice on all of these ships, the rudder that directs that ship and turns that ship is pretty small in comparison to the ship itself. So here's the main point. The purpose of the bit in a horse's mouth and a rudder on a ship is to give it control. The rider wants control of that horse. You want to tell that horse where to go. If the horse wants to go wherever it wants to go, you're in for a very interesting ride because chances are the horse is going to want to go to the barn. No horse is ever sitting in the barn thinking, I wonder what it would be like if they saddled me up and put a bridle in my mouth and put a 300-pound man on me. I'm just anxious to go. No, they don't want that. You want to ride that horse. You want to tell that horse where to go, so you put the bit in its mouth. It's to give you control over that horse. We must learn to control our tongues. It is not an easy task. In this text, he says that if you've learned to control your tongue, if you've learned to bridle or put a bit in your own mouth to control what you say, you've accomplished a whole lot. If you're able to do that, you're going to be able to guard your entire body. And that's what he says. You can take the horse and make its whole body go wherever you want it to go because you have that bit in its mouth. You have that little rudder and it's attached to a steering wheel or something on a boat. You can make it go wherever you want to make it go. And we talk about James being the wisdom literature of the New Testament. Let's turn to what some of the wisdom literature of the Old Testament says about the importance of the tongue. Proverbs 21 and verse 23 says, "Whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from troubles." How many of you would like to keep your soul from a lot of trouble? I don't like trouble. I don't like trouble. And the way that I need to keep my soul from trouble is I need to learn how to guard my mouth. Proverbs chapter 16 verse 23 says, "The heart of the wise teaches his mouth and adds learning to his lips." Who's in control of your tongue? Who should be in control of your tongue? Who tells your tongue what to say? You do, right? It's your heart. It's your mind that has the power to do that. Proverbs 17 and verse 27, it says, "He who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is of a calm spirit. Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he is considered perceptive." You ever known someone like that? Somebody who is wise enough to keep their mouth shut, but they may not have a lot to offer. Who knows? You're sort of thinking, is he not very smart, or is he just wise? So wise, he can control his own tongue. It's hard to know. You are responsible for what you say. Our hearts or our minds will teach our mouths what to say. We talked about a little of this in our class on David. What our actions come out of our hearts. Our mouth speak based upon what is in our heart. So that if we notice our heart isn't doing correctly, we know what's going to happen later. At some point, our mouth's not going to act right, or our actions aren't going to be right. So we need to make careful attention to spend some time making sure our heart is where God wants our heart to be. I have another small illustration here I want to use to help us think about this. I've used this a couple times. I don't think I've used it here. And illustrations and visuals can always go wrong very quickly. So be patient with me here. I got to open the toothpaste. I have a whole bunch of these. If you want to take these home and do this with your children, so your children will understand the importance of what is coming out of their mouth. So what happens, I have to open this up this way, this little pointy thing. Hopefully that worked. All right. So I'm just going to simply do this. I'm going to squeeze all this toothpaste out, and this is just symbolizing us talking, okay? This is us talking, us saying things. And we have a tendency of nowadays to talk about once you put something online, you can never get it back, right? Once you put it out there, it's always out there. That's always been the case. That's always been the case. Once you say something, you can't get it back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this down here. And if anybody can get all the toothpaste back in the tube, Herb will give you $100. I'm just joking. He says that's right. He says amen. He's confident about that, all right? So if you can get all the toothpaste back in the tube, Herb says he's going to give you $100. You can try it. Maybe you can get a couple people together. I don't think it's going to work, but you can try it. And the point being this, once you say something, you've said it. You can't get it back. And it's landed on someone's ears, it's landed on someone's heart, and it's done the damage. You can't get it back. So what's the best thing to do sometimes? Is not say anything. It's to keep the cap on the toothpaste. That's what we ultimately need to learn how to do. So I'm going to step down here, hopefully not break anything. All right, I'm going to go take the stairs back up. I'm not as young as I used to be. Jumping back up there might be a bad idea. I hope that visual was helpful to you. We are responsible for keeping the cap on the toothpaste. Sometimes the best way to control our tongue is simply not to say anything. The Bible clearly teaches that. So we move from this image of a bit in the horse's mouth to control it, and the rudder on the ship to control it, to start talking about what happens when something is out of control that is small. And so he goes to another image, and this next image is a spark and a fire. James chapter 3 and verse 5 is where we're going to pick up now. James chapter 3 and verse 5. It says, even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. So he's going to change the image now. The tongue is small, the bit is small, the rudder is small, and so is a spark. And yet look at the damage that one little spark can do. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature in the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no one can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. The tongue is small, but it can cause great damage. Huge damage, a lot bigger than the tongue itself. It's disproportionate. So I want to talk about one particular fire. I didn't grow up in Chicago. I grew up in Northwest Indiana, but it was outside Chicago. And so the Great Chicago Fire. You learn about that in school. We were taught about the Great Chicago Fire in school. On October 8th, 1871, a fire ignited in Catherine O'Leary's barn in Chicago. That blaze raged on for 3 days. It took out everything 1 mile wide and 4 miles long. Everything was destroyed in its path. When the fire finally ended, when rain came, it had a huge impact on the city of Chicago. They did not find all 300 bodies, but they say over 300 people died. 100,000 residents were left homeless. Can you imagine that in 3 days? 100,000. And Chicago at the time had 300,000 people. A third of all the people that lived in Chicago were homeless. The mayor of the town, in the middle of the night and the first night of the fire, called surrounding cities and said, "We are going to have a lot of homeless people. Can you guys take some of them in?" That's how serious this fire was. Over 17,000 buildings were reduced to rubble. The damages estimated to be $200 million at the time, which is $5.7 billion in today's value. This was a huge fire, devastating impact. Now, there's a lot of debate about what caused that fire, how that fire started. Now, nobody doubts where it started. It started in that barn. But people say, well, how did it start? Did the cow kick over the lantern, and cause the fire? There was a party going on next door, is what Miss O'Leary said. They had some visitors coming from Ireland. There was some fiddling playing late at night. Maybe one of those people came over to our barn and tried to smoke a pipe and caused the fire. There is a man named Sullivan who had a peg leg. He was smoking his pipe outside there. Maybe he caused the fire. Maybe there was a meteor that came out of heaven. Maybe there was a rock that came and landed in the barn, and it was hot and it caused the fire. Maybe, as people are saying that, maybe it just spontaneously erupted because it was so hot. Maybe that happened. How it happened, we don't know. But no one argues the fact that it started small and got big. Isn't that what the point he's making in the book of James? The tongue is small, but look at the damage it can cause if we say the wrong thing at the wrong time or to the wrong person. There's a couple things about that Chicago fire that I want to sort of talk about and then make some parallels to, because I think we need to understand this. Not every spark causes devastating fires. The situation has to be right for that to happen. And so what we need to do as God's people is we need to make sure we sort of fireproof our relationships. So that if something is said that maybe shouldn't have been said, it doesn't cause a devastation, because our relationships are strong and we know each other, we love each other, we have the proper type of respect for one another, and we can sort of make sure that doesn't happen. If that fire had started in another building, maybe in the wealthier side of town that was built out of stone instead of wood, this never would have happened. So there's so many things that would have prevented this from happening if everything had gone right or nothing had gone wrong. And I want to make the point that we need to be busy about making sure our relationships are sort of fireproof, so that a little spark doesn't cause this much damage. And so we're going to talk about that just for a second. First of all, the city of Chicago is growing very fast, and wood is a cheap way to build a home. And so they had very flammable building materials. And it wasn't just that the houses were made out of wood. The roads had wood on them. The bridges were all made out of wood. It was just wood everywhere. And wood is very flammable. On top of the roofs, they had pitch on there, and the pitch was flammable. So you see how this is going? This is set up to burn and burn quickly, not by design, just because of laziness and wanting to turn a fast buck is how this happened. And I want to sort of compare that to unresolved or imagined conflicts. Those are extremely flammable. So if there are unresolved conflicts in our life, and we say something that may not be overly devastating in a normal situation, now because our relationships are not fireproof to this, they've become very susceptible to this one spark causing a great deal of problems. Have you ever ended a situation? This has probably happened at work. Two people might be, if you've supervised people before, one person says something to another person, and the next thing you know, there's this huge thing that's happened. And you get down to it and you said, that's all? That's all they said? And this is what's caused all these problems because they said that? It shouldn't have happened that way. It was because there was something a lot deeper happening as a result. Look what Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 25 says. It says, therefore, putting away all lying, let each one of you speak truth to his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. And isn't Cain a great example of someone who just couldn't do that? Harboring these thoughts and these concepts. I mean, Abel's, all I did was offer a sacrifice to God that was pleasing to him. That's all I did. And you want to kill me? In Genesis chapter 4 and verse 6, it says, so the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at your door, and its desire is for you that it should rule over you. What does Satan want? He wants a lot of fires. He wants a lot of destructive fires. And so he's going to do whatever he can to sort of stir the pot a little bit so that the smallest thing erupts into this major deal. And if we aren't careful about that and allow him to work like that, we will be devastated. Another flammable building material in our relationships is flattery. You know, just saying things that aren't true to make people feel good. It's not a good building material. We have to be careful about that. Second, in Chicago, there was a drought. Dry conditions. It's like for the last 60 or 90 days, they had 0.11 inches of water, rainfall. It was totally dry. If we don't have good communication, we lack constructive communication in our relationships, they're going to be dry. And then if something is said, it's taken out of context, is blown up. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 13 says, he who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. Exodus 32. You remember this story. Moses is up on the mountain getting the Ten Commandments and the law from God. The people are down there and they say, hey, we haven't heard from Moses in a long time. What's ever happened to him? Let's build this calf. If we have a drought in our communication with other people, I hate it when we hear things, and this happens sometimes just because life gets busy, where we just stop talking to people. And if we're doing that with people that we live with, or people that we worship with, or people that we work with, that is a very, very dangerous thing. I think God expected, and Moses expected, that Aaron would have been communicating God's message to the people while Moses was gone. But he wasn't. As a matter of fact, when they had that meal up on the mountain, the 70 elders, Aaron was there, Hur was there. Moses tells everybody, I'm going to go talk to God some more. And they said, well, they didn't want Moses to leave. He says, don't worry about it. You have Aaron. You have Hur down there. And when God is pronouncing judgment, who is the person that he pronounces the greatest judgment on? It's on Aaron. Moses looked at Aaron and says, what have you allowed these people to do? What if Aaron, the entire 40 days that Moses was up on top getting the law, what if every day he says, let's assemble together and let's talk about all the good things God has done for us? Remember the Red Sea, how he brought us through that? Remember all the things he did over on the other side? It was this drought of communication, it seems to be, that caused this to happen. Moses had to be on the mountain. Aaron was down with the people. It was his responsibility to make sure communication about God was taking place. Number 3, limited firefighting resources. There was a fire earlier in the day, and it was a big fire, and it took all the firefighters. When they got back, they didn't prepare their engines for the next fire. They were tired, and so they all went to bed. And so when this fire happened, they lost some resources in the previous fire. Everybody was tired, and they weren't prepared for what was to happen next. Lack or misplaced trust in relationships can cause things to go up in flames as well. Trusting that the firefighters were ready, but they weren't. As a matter of fact, one of the things that went wrong was the guy who was on the water. Everybody been to Chicago and seen the water tower in Chicago? That's still there. Had that looking out for fires, saw the fire, sent him to the wrong place. It was 45 minutes. longer before they got there. When they got there, even though they weren't well prepared, they were already too late. It was already up in flames. Joshua chapter 9. The Gibeonites, they want to make a covenant with God's people. And look what it says there. And the men of Israel took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel of the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the rulers of the congregation swore to them. They placed their trust in the wrong people. And therefore they communicated an oath that they had to follow. And just to let you guys know who are in the David class, the Gibeonites are going to come back. 400 or 500 years later, the Gibeonites are coming back, and they're going to be a thorn in the children of Israel's flesh again that David's going to have to deal with. In Judges chapter 16, it says about Delilah, and it came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all that was in his heart. And he said to her, no razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaven, my strength will leave me, and I'll be like all other men. We have to be careful who we trust in our relationships and who we tell things to. Yes, the people that we love, the people that we're associated with, the people that we have strong relationships with, we need to be able to talk to. But other people, we need to be careful of. And then the fourth one that we'll talk about, strong winds and fire tornadoes. The wealthier people on the other side of the river, they actually got on their roofs and they watched the other people's houses burn. They thought that the fire could never get to us because of the river. But it turns out there was so much pollution on the river that the fire could burn across the river. And it had what is known as, they had strong winds. It's not called the Windy City for nothing, right? It had strong winds, and you have this thing called fire tornadoes. You see pictures of these things. It's pretty crazy because the fire will actually, I should have talked to Daniel about this, could cause a tornado type effect and lift burning materials up into the air. And if the wind is blowing strong, it blows those hot burning materials far away. And so now you have a fire, but then you have another fire you have to put out because it's blown over here. Has that ever happened to you where you have one fire and you're concentrating on this one fire, and next thing you know there's another fire over there caused by the same miscommunication or bad communication, and there's another fire over there? And that's what happens a lot of times with the way that we communicate. People often fan the flames, turning a seemingly small verbal mistake into an inferno that even the wisest among us can't even extinguish. Proverbs 16 and verse 28, a perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends. Psalm 52 and verse 1, why do you boast in evil, O mighty man? The goodness of God endures continually. The tongue devises devastation like a sharp razor working deceitfully. You love evil more than good, lying more than speaking the righteousness. You love all devouring words, you deceitful tongue. Now, it's not the tongue, it's the person that's controlling that tongue, right? So some people are whisperers. Some people are talebearers. Some people are gossips. And they can take something that is innocent and fan the flames, have these tornadoes going, causing issues every single place that they go. We got to be careful of that. Proverbs 26 and verse 20 says, where there is no word, the fire goes out, and where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. As charcoal is to burning coals and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the innermost body. Job's friends were like this, right? As long as they kept their mouth shut for 3 days, they didn't do him any harm. As soon as they opened their mouth, they started doing him harm. He rebuked them. God rebuked them because of that. Sometimes you gotta keep the cap on the toothpaste, because once it comes out, you can't get it back in there. And that's what Job's friends ended up doing. Let's make sure our relationships are sort of fireproof. The two best ways to do that is follow the golden rule and the second great commandment. If we're doing that, chances are, if we say something out of context, out of character, it's not going to blow up on us. But if we're not doing that, The smallest thing can cause a great fire. The last thing that he talks about are springs and trees. Let's read it. James chapter 3 and verse 9. With it, our tongue, we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not to be. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter water from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields salt water and fresh. So here's the point. We should only use our words and our tongues to speak uplifting and edifying words. And when we have to speak challenging, difficult things, we have to be very careful what we say and how we say it. Now, we're not saying if somebody needs to have a problem addressed, we don't address it. We have to address it, but we have to address it with love. We have to address it with kindness based upon a relationship that is already strong. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 29 says, let no corrupt communication come out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification. So the answers to the blanks there, no corrupt words should come out of our mouth. And I struggle with this for lots of reasons. I think we all struggle with it personally, right? We all struggle with saying things we shouldn't say. If you don't struggle with that, you are a perfect man. Congratulations. I've also noticed something over the last, 15 years, maybe 20. There doesn't seem to be the same view, even among Christians, especially in the world, of what is acceptable to say and what is not acceptable to say. You see when you try to watch something on TV or watch a movie, it's like, if you haven't watched a movie in 10 years and you turn the movie on, you'd be like, what in the world has happened? And I think I've noticed it in the younger generation, that they will argue, it's just a word. What does it matter? What does it hurt? It's like we've gone way off to the side to say we can say whatever we want, whenever we want, and we don't have to care about it. We need to watch our tongues. If you are in the audience and you use profanity at work or around people, stop doing that. If you're saying things that are hurtful to people and you have a reputation that way, just stop saying that. Stop doing that. We can be tactful and still get our point across if our point needs to be gotten across. Proverbs 15 verse 4, a wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. Proverbs 8:12 and verse 18, there is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat of its fruit. Matthew chapter 7, you all are aware of that. Jesus talks about one tree could not bear another fruit. He talks about that in the James passage too, right? So if you have a good heart, most of the time you're going to say good things. None of us are going to be perfect at this. And so we need to make sure our hearts are right. And if our hearts are right about people, then our talking is going to be correct about them as well. I had about 8 practical suggestions throughout the course of the lesson, and I went and took them all out. And I'm just going to make it very simple for us. All right? First of all, in moments of conflict, learn the habit of just pausing. Walking away, let's talk about this some other time. But then, when you brush your teeth in the morning, what I want you to do is I want you to pray asking God to help you control your tongue and use your tongue to say good things. So you don't have to hum the whatever happy birthday song so you know you're washing your hands long enough or brushing your teeth long enough. Just pray to God. And you know what? We might have great dental result from this because I might be there like 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I really need God to help me with this today because I have all these issues going on. And in the evening when you brush your teeth, think about how that worked that day. How did I use my tongue today? Was it good or bad? And then ask God to help. So I'm assuming, we were taught to brush our teeth 3 times a day. I'm assuming that we all try to brush our teeth twice a day. All right? So we usually try to brush our teeth in the morning and in the evening. And if you just take that time where you're already brushing your teeth, think about, all right, I need to keep the cap on my tongue today. And I need to make sure I'm only saying good things. I'm only building people up. And that'll just be our reminder. I have the toothpaste down here. If you want to take the toothpaste, anybody wants to earn $100, I'm going to take this outside. All right? Take this outside, and you can have at it. You can try to get that toothpaste back in that tube. And then there's all kinds of things. Does it need to be said? Is it true? Is it helpful? All those are very important things. The perfect example of how to use the tongue was Jesus. Peter says that, right? He says people said bad things about him. He kept his mouth shut. People said bad things to him. He did not answer in return. And that's how we need to be. The only way we can do that is be connected to God through Jesus Christ. And if we can help you do that, we ask you to come as we stand and sing.